Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. This year's Edinburgh International Book Festival featured a series of events subtitled A Theatrical Exploration, in which well-known Scottish novels were partly staged by a director, scriptwriter and actors, and then presented before an audience, followed by a question and answer session with the production team and novelist. Produced in association with Edinburgh's Lyceum Theatre, the three novels explored in this way were The Outrun by Amy Liptrot, Dirt Road by James Kelman, and Booker-nominated His Bloody Project by Graeme Macrae Burnet. On a busy final Saturday at the 2017 Book Festival in Charlotte Square Gardens, I spoke to Graeme Macrae Burnet about his involvement with the project. His Bloody Project,
yes.
Booker-nominated novel last year, and now it's taken on a completely new form as a play. Unfortunately, I didn't see it. But what was it?
It's not a full-blown play as such. I mean, the idea was to explore the book in a different way with a director, another writer on board, Duncan MacLean, and some actors. Playing some scenes from the book. I mean, the brief. It's a cooperation between the Lyceum Theatre here in Edinburgh and the Book Festival. The brief was very vague, really. So we had 3 days of rehearsal, and for me it was just a fantastic experience being in the rehearsal room, watching the actors go about their business, watching Paul Brotherton, the director, go about his business, seeing how Duncan MacLean worked with the text. Obviously you've got to strip it down to the bones. So it was a brilliant experience for me, and it was amazing seeing these three young actors, what they brought to the roles they were playing and their insight into the characters. So it was fantastic.
But it's a very different experience to being a novelist when you're working by yourself. I mean,
absolutely.
I noticed a few years ago you won a competition and refused to have a mentor because you like to work by yourself.
Yeah, I didn't really refuse to have a mentor. The timing was wrong.
Right.
But I mean, having said that, I am an arch individualist, and
so working in something that's so collaborative must
absolutely.
Be.
No, it's totally different, and I'm not a natural collaborator. But I did used to work in TV production, and the good lesson you learn in TV, where everyone has their delegated role, there's a director, there's an editor, etc., etc. You see that different people have different skill sets. So it was easy for me to work with actors because I have never in my life, for even a nanosecond, wanted to tread the boards. And it was easy to work with the director because he's got a skill set that I don't have. And I think the most difficult thing would be, there was no problem working with another writer on this occasion, because Duncan MacLean, he'd selected some scenes to perform, and I really liked the scenes he performed, but I think you're more likely to rub up against another writer because that's what you do too. Completely different experience. I tried to take as much of a backseat as I could. I felt very lucky that they were happy to have me there. But I was also aware that, not to disturb the dynamic that they have between themselves. So it was a great experience. I'd love to do something else, involved with the theatre. So that was a good sort of look behind the curtain.
Did it give you a taste of wanting to maybe write specifically for the theatre?
I would like to write something for the theatre, but I think I always think that if you're a novelist or a poet or a scriptwriter, you have to be quite respectful to the fact that you write. I'm trying to develop myself as a novelist. That's the form I know. I feel I've got some understanding of it as a form. I don't know how to write for the theatre, so I'd be going back to square one. I'd need to learn how you go about doing that. Yes, I'd love to write something at some point, but I wouldn't. It would have to be theatrical in its conception rather than an idea that I might use for a short story or a novel or something. So yes, I'd like to do it, but I'd need to learn. I'd need to go back to school on it a bit, I think.
And it'd need to be a story that came to you that you thought lent itself to that form.
Absolutely, definitely. So I mean, at the moment I'm just concentrating on the novel writing, and that's it's a big commitment. But it is nice to do something with some other people. Writing novels is long and lonely. It's grueling. I work in a library in Glasgow, because, just to get rid of distractions. So the idea of doing something where you're working with people who've got these different skill sets is really exciting.
Yeah.
And it's more fun to go to work, that's for sure.
Yeah. So did it give you a different insight into your own work, your own character, seeing it done in that way?
That was the first question that I was asked. There was a Q&A afterwards, and when your book, I'm lucky enough that the book has now gone around the world.
Yeah.
And you get different responses from different readers in different parts of the world. You get different responses from every individual reader, and I'm completely 100% open to the fact that the book kind of belongs to the reader.
Yeah.
And so all readers come with their own ideas about the book. They interpret the book. Paul and Duncan and the actors, they are also coming with their interpretation of the book.
Yeah.
So you are seeing it it's more obvious because it's taking place in front of your eyes.
Yeah.
And they are performing it, and sometimes you're like, no, I don't think the character is so angry at that point, or whatever. And that's, of course, what the director's working towards with the actors as well.
Yeah.
But you are seeing their interpretation of the character. The strangest thing, because obviously at events I read passages from the book, and I have my own sort of low droning Scottish voice, and I have my own intonation patterns and whatnot.
Yeah.
So hearing an actor read passages that I've read before, that's the oddest thing, because you see these little shifts in emphasis, and even reading out something as a active interpretation. So, but all good, because I was so impressed with everything they did, and as I say, with the actors and Paul, the director.
It's like when you a record that you know well, when you hear it sung live, and it's just slight differences.
Absolutely, it's exactly like that. A live version of something, or a cover version. A cover version is an interpretation of a song. And it's the book sort of goes out and exists in different forms. I feel really lucky that the book was chosen. And it came out nearly 2 years ago. It's still got a life. The event was sold out in a matter of hours.
Must be a good figure.
And when at the beginning of the event, Paul or Duncan asked if anybody had read the book, and there was a sea of hands. Everybody in the tent had read the book, so it's just like, that's quite nice. Absolutely.
Well, what you were talking about there, Cressida Cowell did the Siobhan Dowd lecture here yesterday, which I saw, and she was saying whenever you do an adaptation of a book, it's always going to be to some extent a disappointment for the readers, because if you've got 100,000 readers, they've already got 100,000 different interpretations of what that's like. That must be more so for the author.
Absolutely. I think with theatre, we've sold film rights, so at some point something may happen. I think if you see a film or a television series based on a book, it really fixes the characters and the locations in the viewer's mind. I think with theatre, it's transitory, and it doesn't have the same impact on the book. I think you can still go away and read the book and form your own opinions more easily about the characters, come to your own view, even sort of visualise it in a different way. I think that's much harder with a sort of screen adaptation. I'd be very excited to see it on the theatre. I love set design and the sort of creativity that people bring to that, and how they can shift scenes. And I love, sort of very simple studio kind of theatre where it's just a black box sort of thing. You're very close to the actors, so it would be exciting to see what people do with it. And it's just having this respect for other people's the creativity that they bring to something.
You're going to let go a bit.
Definitely, And I'm lucky because the book, has its own life now. And as I say, it's nearly 2 years since it came out. If it had come out 2 months ago, I think I would have felt a lot more precious about it. No, you can't cut that sentence. That is so important. So you do get a bit more distant from it.
I suppose it's like when you see actors going out promoting films, in many cases they wrapped on that film 2 years ago or something.
Absolutely, totally. And I finished writing the book probably nearly 3 years ago.
Do you have to think back sometimes to remember?
Sometimes, because there was a lot of research involved. It's set in 1869. So sometimes if I'm doing certain kind of events where I know I'll be asked researchy kind of questions, I kind of refresh my memory and flick through my notes.
You've got big files, have you?
Yeah. But you do. And that came up during this exploration, because Duncan had just read and reread the book in order to come up with his sort of outline. And I was like, oh, you can't do that. He's like, that doesn't happen. He's like, yeah, it does here. And I, so it was much pressure in his mind than it was in mine. I mean, I don't think very many authors sit and reread their own work.
No.
And I certainly don't, but and I've also been interacting with translators recently, and they know the book inside out, sentence by sentence, and they even now pick up things that are little errors here and there. One of the translators pointed out that in a certain scene in the book, the sun is pointing in the wrong direction. I'm like, wow, that's very super observant, bordering on the pedantic perhaps, but there was not really anything I can do about that.
But if one person that you've spoken to has noticed that, there's probably a lot of other people who you haven't spoken to as well.
Well, that's possibly true, but I have mentioned it to a lot of people and nobody has said, oh yeah, I noticed that. You have to know which way this particular house is facing, because the shadow was cast through the door. So, the translator was right. But I couldn't turn the house round.
No. If that is translated to film, then somebody in the design team will probably.
Well, we can get rid of the shadow, I think.
What sorts of questions did you get from actors? I know actors tend to be very hungry for information to build up their pictures.
I mean, I totally went in with an attitude that I will sit at the back of the room and let them do their work. And it was really interesting for me hearing the conversation between Duncan and Paul, the writer and director, and the three actors, and they all brought something talking about how they thought the characters were feeling or why they're behaving in this way at a certain point. So I gave them as much room as I could. I mean, I did intervene, a few times. There was certain points where I felt like Roddy and his sister were kind of sharing a secret with each other, and they performed it, rather sort of in a sort of declarative way. I felt like this is a really intimate moment, and and the way Roddy, when he commits the murders in the book, some of these actions are very shameful to him. So at that point, I felt, you need to sort of be less enraged or whatever. So it was that, again, really interesting to have these interactions, but I can't fault what they already brought to the character. And I think you have to let people, I'm not used to collaborating, except in the past in TV, but everyone has a very clearly delineated roles in TV. I think it's really important to let people have the space to explore their part in the production for themselves, and not have, I'm sure the author is probably the last person that most actors and directors want in the room. Oh no, the writer's coming in today, and being no, it's not like that. This is how it is. And I hope I wasn't like that. You need to get the other guys and ask them.
I think that's probably more true of directors than actors. Actors are often, they want as much information as possible, but directors, they need to take control. They need to.
Well, during the performance, we actually had a kind of we joked about this a couple of times. I began the performance by introducing myself in the book, and then Paul, the director, kind of pushed me off the stage and said, "Oh well, no, this is not about the book. This is about my production." And later, Duncan said, as they were discussing a scene they'd just played, very Brechtian, of course. Well, the author's here, why don't we just ask him? And Paul was like, well, whatever he says doesn't matter. I mean, I am very much of the sort of Roland Barthes, death of the author kind of school. So, I enjoyed all that kind of, it was a bit of fun, but on that theme. And it is a thing in itself. A theatrical production is a thing in itself. It's not a book, and it can't be a book. And my book is very booky. It's very literary in its construction. It uses lots of literary devices that you can't translate in a literal way to the stage. And I think that's why, again, it's an exciting process. It's not just about story. I mean, it is about story and it is about character. I think they're kind of the heart of most things. But the way of telling the story is very different.
I mean, when I was reading what people had said about it, the word metafiction came up. And there is a theatrical equivalent, meta-theatre, where it's self-referential, and I thought the two would seem to work together.
And that's what Paul's very first, the only discussion we'd had prior to these 3 days of rehearsal, I met Paul in a pub in Glasgow, and he said, he didn't want to reverentially sort of play some scenes from the book. He wanted to try to reflect the experience of reading the book.
Yeah.
And in the book, you get various points of view on the same scene, and you get my own authorial introduction to the various documents that make up the book.
Yeah.
Very, metafictional. So Paul wanted to somehow incorporate that experience. So they played a scene, and then one of the actors said, "Yes, that's what Roddy said happened." And then they replayed the scene through the point of view of a character who was a witness in the trial. So
right.
the same scene with almost the same words was played out, but the actors, great fun for an actor, I think, to play the same scene, kind of calm, sweet, gawky teenage boy, and then becoming a rather more aggressive, abusive sort of character, but playing the same scene. And that, this was a kind of illustration of, it's quite easy to do that in a novel, because you can present different points of view. Readers are very used to that. Yeah. But theatre tends to be a more linear experience where what you see is the interpretation as put forward to the audience. You don't normally replay things and see it from different points of view. So, again, there was some effort to replicate these kind of devices, but in a theatrical way. Yeah,
and there has been theatre where I have seen that happen, like Michael Fraid and Tom Stoppard, where it could have happened like that.
Yeah.
But then it could have happened like this, and have another go at it. So there is some precedent. Sure. I think probably it's more difficult with film, because film you expect absolute naturalism.
Yeah, that sort of stuff in film is taking you into what would probably even now still be regarded as sort of fairly avant-garde film practice. But I think theatre and novels are probably generally experimentalist kind of devices are probably more run-of-the-mill, most theatre, as you're probably saying, isn't as straight as I might be describing.
There has been some confusion with this novel, possibly some of it slightly deliberate, and with your previous novel about what's real. Even your surname appears in the novel, and you said about the introduction. So there's a certain playfulness between reality and fiction.
I like the word playful. It is playful. But there's also, and it's I don't set out when I start something with a sort of I'm trying to make a point about something or making a comment about it. But this whole question of sort of fact and fiction, the first question I'm often asked at events is, did it really happen? Are these documents real? And I've become really, really interested in sort of thinking that through, because when we sit down to read a novel, we immerse ourselves in this fictional world, which we know is fictional, but in order for the novel to be successful on a sort of emotional level, we have to believe it's real, or we have to find it. It has to have a reality about it, an authenticity. And when you play on the authenticity, or if you actually try to make out within your fictional novel that things are actually real, then people I think it just causes people to sort of start pondering these questions, which I do think are really interesting questions. There was a review, just an Amazon review, for my first book. The Disputes of Delvaux, is set in France, and I pretend that I am only the translator of the book, and it was written by a fictional author called Graeme Burnet. And it's kind of an add-on to the book, like a DVD extra in a way. But there was a review, and the writer seemed to have enjoyed the book, but having read this sort of fictional afterword about the fictional author, just got very disgruntled that the novel he had been reading wasn't real. And his headline was, "It's a shame it's also fake." And I just think it's like, wow. To accuse a novel of being fake, it's just such a bizarre thing to do. But it's about that thing of like you want to buy into the reality of the novel, and when you kind of prick that bubble, people can sometimes get a little bit annoyed. It is playful, maybe bordering on mischievous. But I find these questions very interesting.
Yeah, because you were accused of even being deceptive with that first novel.
Well, yes. The thing was, when you write your first novel, or at least when I was writing mine, I didn't imagine anybody was ever going to read it. And then when you have your launch, and I'm from Glasgow, I had a launch in Glasgow, and everybody knows I wrote a book. But it was only I went down to London and to sign some books, to go around some bookshops, and most of the booksellers thought it wasn't actually a French novel. And it never crossed my mind that somebody would believe this fictional device within the book.
Yeah.
And my name is on the cover. So it was a surprise, and it just started me thinking about all these questions we've been talking about. Yeah. I didn't. That's the thing. It's like people don't want to feel that you've deceived them, but when you read a novel, there's a pact between the reader and the book where you're engaging in an act of deception because you know it's not real.
Yeah.
The author has made it up, but people are annoyed.
Yes.
When you tell them that it's made up or it's not what they think it is.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. I don't have an answer. I just find all these things very interesting.
Yeah, Paul Auster, who was here before I came to the festival, he does that a lot. He puts his own name and some of his own genuine background.
I think the New York stories where, if I think somebody phones them up and says I'm Paul Auster, and he ends up following himself or something like that, and they are present in the text. I'm a huge fan of Georges Simenon, the Belgian author, who's not normally associated with these kind of meta-textual, meta-fictional devices, but I was actually reading a book he wrote in the mid-50s called Maigret's Memoir, Maigret being his famous detective character. Yeah. In this book, Maigret himself writes a memoir about Georges Simenon, writing about him, and reflects on how Simenon appears in the novel as a young journalist who's come to talk to Maigret, and Maigret reflects on the way that he has that Georges Simenon has portrayed Maigret in the books and what's not true about it, and how he actually sort of became more like the fictional character. Yeah, it's amazing, absolutely amazing, and very uncharacteristic of Simenon.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing. Probably when you're reading it makes sense, but when you just sort of take a step back and think, what's going on here?
I know. Yeah, and that when in his bloody project, it's all fiction, but I did come across in the research this real character called James Bruce Thompson, who was a psychiatrist in Scotland at the time, quite renowned. He ran the General Prison for Scotland, where criminally insane were housed, and he was a real character, and he appears in the novel, and that just creates another level of confusion.
The interesting thing about the story is that it's about this horrific crime, but it's not about who did it.
No,
it's about motivation, and that's something that is. I mean, it was the subject of the play Equus, Peter Schaffer, but it's also the subject of real life crime all the time. Like Dr. Shipman, who's from just down the road from me. That was something we never found out why he did it, and he killed himself in prison. And it feels like we've lost out. Why do you think people are fascinated with why people did it? Do you think they just want to distance themselves from them, or? That's
a brilliant question. I mean, there is a huge appetite for like true crime books. And I've worked in bookshops. The readership for true crime seems to be predominantly female, which always seems weird because a lot of these books are often about very violent crimes against women. I think people are generally fascinated by sort of insanity, what leads people to do violent, aberrant things. But then they like to have explanations. Maybe as you say, you feel frustrated or cheated that you don't know why Harold Shipman committed these murders, because you seek narrative closure. And that's in a way what psychiatry sometimes seeks to do. Provides closure, provides motivation. It puts it in a box with a diagnosis. I mean, in the book, and you're absolutely right in the description. It's not. We know from the beginning that Roddy Macrae has committed these murders. So he describes the events leading up to the murders, and the question is, why did he do it? Did he do it for the reasons he states? Is he insane or not insane? And the book leaves it for the reader to make up his or her own mind about the answers to those questions. So that it doesn't provide that closure that maybe you're looking for. But there's a long history, I think, in fiction and in crime fiction of books which really explore the sort of the psychological workings of the criminal rather than looking at sort of police procedural kind of crime. I think Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is the kind of best example. And I was actually rereading it recently because I was on a trip to Russia, And it's a book that's had a huge influence on me.
Yeah.
And I was so struck by the machinations that go through Raskolnikov's mind in the pages leading up towards the murder of the old woman.
Yeah.
And it's totally fascinating. And then you see these parallels. Well, I mean, I'm not comparing my own book to Crime Punishment, but there are parallels in the way the two characters sort of think through and almost legitimise what they're going to do by saying that it's an act of providence in Roddy's case, or Raskolnikov sees various omens that seem to be all pointing towards the inevitability of the crime that he ends up committing.
Yeah.
In
practical terms, it doesn't matter. You've got the person who did it; they can be punished or whatever. But there are so many books written about Lee Harvey Oswald. He almost certainly did it, but
that's another conversation.
And we know that Jack Ruby killed him. That was captured, but why? People still need to know why.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of political assassinations and whatnot. I think, leaving Lee Harvey Oswald's state of mind aside, it's quite easy for us to say, well, there's a political motivation for this. And we all probably have sort of political opinions. We just don't act violently on them, most of us. Yeah. But when it's more, if it's sort of crimes of sort of revenge or sexual violence, the thing is, I think there's also a side inside the readers of these books, the people who watch these films, that are sort of salacious. You're drawn to it. You want to read about it. The more horrifying it is. Yeah. In my books, there is a scene of brutal violence at the centre of His Bloody Project, but my other books are not in the least bit violent, even although they're kind of crime novels. There's no long descriptions of violence. They're quite quiet books, but a lot of crime fiction, which is the most popular genre by a street, and among British readers, is very violent. And people must like reading descriptions of violence, because if they didn't, they wouldn't. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't buy these books.
What's it like to write those descriptions? How, do you feel?
Well, as I say, the scene in which Roddy murders his three victims, that's the biggest section in the book is Roddy's section. It's about 150 pages, and I knew what was going to happen, but I didn't write that scene until I'd written the whole of Roddy's section, because it's a cathartic scene for Roddy, and I wanted it to somehow be also sort of cathartic for me to write. And I wrote it. Roddy's in prison recounting what he's done. We're not in his mind as he commits his actions. So he's writing an account. And although it is, and I know this because it was read through during the rehearsals in its entirety, and I was like, it's pretty strong. And it has to be strong.
Yeah.
But actually the descriptions are very sparse, and there's very few adjectives and whatnot. There's no dwelling on there's not a great deal of dwelling on the actual acts of violence. What's important for me in writing that scene was Roddy's state of mind. So after he's killed one of the victims, a pot of potatoes has fallen to the floor, and he pauses and puts the potatoes back and rearranges them on the table. And so these sort of details for me sort of suggest a sort of disassociation with what he's doing. It's like, why in the midst of committing these terrible, brutal acts would you stop and pick up some potatoes that have fallen to the floor? So I tried to keep it as sparse as it goes back to Simenon as well. Simenon is a writer who uses the fewest number of words, but he's tremendously suggestive. You can visualise what he writes about very easily, and that's the lesson for me in all writing, is like to do the minimum in order to put across the effect you want to get. And it is important that scene is shocking. And when I first reread it, I was like, whew. But then, it's like it had to be like that, But I don't think it's sort of salacious, or gaudy. It is a bit gaudy.
Have other people looked at you differently after having read that, thinking that's come out of your head?
They're probably too scared to tell me. I don't know. When you're writing stuff, you just can't afford to think about that. My mom's going to read this, or whatever. Val McDermott, I was at an event of hers recently, and she said, "I've never read in 30 books. She's never written a sex scene because her mother's still alive." I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, this whole thing about the death of the author. I mean, I when I'm reading, I don't care what the author intended, etc. If they're trying to push some sort of message or meaning, that's a real turn off for me.
Yeah.
So I don't think about the author, but I do understand that other readers do. And I think with my first book, the central character is he's a bit sleazy, and he has problems with women, and he's not very successful sexually. So I think people probably thought, all right, there's a scene where Manfred, the central character, goes to a brothel in Strasbourg, and he commits this sort of rather seedy act. And I'm sure that sort of thing, people probably go, oh, Graeme, he's got a dirty night. I mean, I've never been in a brothel in my life and never would. I just made it up.
Yeah.
But I suppose, I did. I had to have those thoughts in order to write it.
Yeah.
But, if that's in it, you put something in the public domain, you are also to some extent putting yourself in the public domain, and c'est la vie.
Yes. The Booker Prize thing, what was that like? How did that come about? How did you find out about it?
Your publisher submits, is allowed to submit one book, so I was lucky that my publisher put my book forward. I was doing odd jobs at the time. I wasn't able to be a full-time writer, so I got a telephone call completely out of the blue. I knew the book had been put in, it's just absolute mind-blowing experience, especially coming from where I was, not a particularly well-known writer. I was the outlier on that list. There was a couple. There's always a couple, and as soon as you're on the long list, you realise that it's a global. The interest in that prize is global. So there's interest from foreign publishers, and then once you're on the short list, it all gets racked up again. The experience completely changed my life.
Yeah.
The book's published, I think, in 15 languages now, or will be, in more countries than that. I've been literally all over the world this year, from New Zealand to USA, Russia, Estonia, China, and I'm able now to be a full-time writer. Yeah. So it's completely transformative, and there's no downside. But the most important thing is it puts your book in view of people, and I like to think as well that the book it now has a life, and it's not just because the booker did put it in the spotlight, but it sustained the life beyond that. And the event last week that we've been discussing, is the long tail that the book has. I've been in Germany where the book's being taught in some university curriculums, which is wow. And these are the things which will sustain a book. It's not just a flash in the pan. And here in Scotland, it's really had. I think it's had quite a big impact. It's been widely read in Scotland. It's a bit, and in some ways, it's such a Scottish book. But that's when you go abroad and you hear readers from Estonia or China. A Chinese journalist told me that it reminded her of the atmosphere of oppression during the Cultural Revolution. Yeah. So people find their own resonances with something which is apparently so local in the sort of power structures or the organisation of society, or the way the people at the bottom can't access those in authority. Yeah. And people find parallels in Australia. People talk to me about the relationships between Aboriginal people and colonial settlers. Yeah. People mention sharecroppers in the USA, in Russia. There was talk about serfdom, and so it's amazing how these parallels come up. You don't put those into the book, but readers take them out, and it's all connected with this ideas we've been talking about, that people bring a lot of themselves to the book, and that's the important thing, not what I put in the book. I create the characters and the story and so on, but it's important that people can relate to it in some way, whether they're in China or. But I think if you set out to do that, I think you'd probably come up with something very anodyne.
A theatrical adaptation in Russia or China could be very different, because it would probably pick out different aspects of the book, probably, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I was having these conversations about Dostoevsky when I was in Russia, and I said to a journalist she was actually a Dostoevsky, she'd written her doctorate on Dostoevsky, so she knew considerably more, but my knowledge was exhausted after about 3 minutes. But, I made the point to her that her Dostoevsky is different from my Dostoevsky. Yeah. I mean, I'm reading Dostoevsky. Until then, I'd never been to Russia. I'd never been to St. Petersburg. I don't know that much about Russian culture. So I'm probably seeing in Raskolnikov sort of themes of sort of existentialism and things like that I'm interested in. And I'm bringing that kind of baggage, very sort of European baggage to that book. It's a European book, of course. Yeah. But, if you're reading that book and you're immersed in sort of Russian history and culture, you maybe see it as a very different book. Yeah. So, yeah.
Like there's an English tradition of Chekhov, which is very sort of stiff upper lipped, English aristocratic, which is very different from the more emotional Russian versions.
Yeah, right, okay, so that's interesting, But Chekhov, I'm guessing there's probably pretty much always a Chekhov production somewhere in the UK.
Yeah, but in Russia he's known, I believe, more as a short story writer.
Well, I mean, I visited Chekhov's house when I was over.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we were taken there. It was really interesting. And they actually, they have a statue to his 2 dogs. Which I thought, wow. They have such incredible reverence for writers there. Yeah. Particularly the sort of Tolstoy, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, Pushkin, they have godlike status. Yeah. And there was an incredible seriousness about literature, which you don't often find here, and a different attitude towards literature. Still, it seemed that there was a sense that literature should be morally improving. Yeah. And I think that in Britain, if you were to suggest that as an author, people would think you were rather pompous. Yes. I write to improve my readers. Really, I think you probably get the finger from your audience members. Yeah.
So what's next then?
I'm just finished. Unbelievably, I managed to finish another book. So I've got a new book. It's a sequel to my first book. So I'm back in this small town in France called Saint Louis. The book's called The Accident on the A35. And in this book, my fictional author, Graeme Burnet, is writing a fictionalised account of the death of his own father, which is mentioned in the afterword of his first book. Right. So there's a kind of meta-fictional sort of bookending of the book, but actually, what matters most is that people read the book and enjoy the book as a piece of fiction. The rest of the stuff is kind of mischief, playfulness. Yeah. But it's a book about a teenage boy, same age as Roddy Macrae, 17. Weird recurrence of that. He's kind of investigating where his father had been on the night he died. Yeah. And my detective character, George Goski, is kind of also half-heartedly investigating this as well. Right. Partly because he's got a bit of a liking for the widow. Right. So it's just, it's a character. It's, for me, everything is character. Character is everything. Setting. Actually, the book's easily the most action-packed book I've written, but completely by accident, for want of a better phrase. So that's out in October the 26th. So I'll be having a few events around the country to launch it into the world.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Millie Thomas is beginning to make a big name for herself in Edinburgh with a play called Dust that she wrote and also performs. Certainly talking to one or two other critics, we've all come to the conclusion that it reminds us somewhat, for better or worse, of the work of Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who did Fleabag in Edinburgh not too many years ago and is now a TV superstar, having created a TV series out of it. Millie, welcome.
Hi.
First of all, what made you decide you wanted to write a play to perform yourself in Edinburgh? It's kind of a big undertaking.
I performed my own work before in the past. When I write, I'm always very clear from the get-go whether or not it's going to be for me or for someone else. And Dust is very much a story I'd wanted to tell myself. It's something that had been sitting with me for a long time, and tonally it's a very specific piece of work, and it's something that I felt I wanted to see through in that way.
And we're now halfway through The Fringe. Are you happy with that decision?
Yeah, no, very much so. It's weird, actually. I had my day off a couple of days ago and I really missed it. I felt, neglectful that I wasn't doing it. I felt very, had a bit of separation anxiety from it. But I'm sort of in my stride now, where I feel I'm sort of looking forward to it every day, which is nice, because that's
as opposed to dreading it, certainly.
Well, yeah, because it's not always the case. And I still get nerves. I don't know if performance nerves will ever go away. The minute I start, the nerves are gone. But while the house is opening, that's always, prime time for feeling really, really unwell.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the play, because you're a ghost?
See, it's interesting. I wouldn't call her a ghost necessarily. It's really funny. When we were doing dramaturgy on it, we all avoided using the word ghost, because it's almost... I wouldn't necessarily call it a ghost story. I have a real aversion to... Because I associate the word ghost with something sort of spooky, and this is very much... It's the story of Alice, who has taken her own life and finds herself stuck and has to watch the consequences of her actions sort of spiralling out in front of her, and how she's affected her friends and family with her actions. And also it's a play about learning to love life, I think, to an extent, and the reality of what depression can do when it tips over into a suicidal manifestation. And I haven't wanted to shy away from the reality of that at all. And so in that sense, it's very much... Alice's experiences are, I feel, to an extent, they're relatable. Her life is a relatable life, I feel, for a lot of people. And so I wanted it to feel... It's almost like she's a tourist in her own life, if that makes sense.
And you balance or mix humour with some very serious issues. Was that always the intention, or was that just the way the writing came out?
I know it was always the intention. I think I feel very strongly... it's such a serious topic, and I feel that if you didn't laugh, you'd cry. And I think it's a knife edge you have to navigate. And I think there's something about that balancing act. You can't... I feel that as performer and writer, I mustn't over-revere the subject matter, because otherwise it can become a lecture. It can tip over into a sort of self-referential preach. But at the same time, there's a huge duty of care, and it's really, really important to, because it's no laughing matter. But also, if you don't laugh, you'd cry. So you're sort of... and which I think is quite reflective of, the human experience, really, isn't it? So there is humour to be found there. And I'm always looking for that, I think, as a writer. I always want to mine that. I think because I get a thrill out of that as an audience member when I go and see stuff that makes me laugh, and then I catch myself and think, oh my God, I can't believe I laughed at that. I think that's a really unique... experience.
I think it's also the real strength of this piece.
Yeah, it's just because it forces people to interrogate stuff that's deep inside them that they didn't know was there, and any reaction that you have, you're constantly navigating the piece and navigating what you feel about what you're seeing, which is a real thrill and joy as a writer and actor.
What's the audience reaction been like? Do you know? Obviously you can hear how people are reacting when you're standing on stage and performing.
Yeah.
I imagine people come up to you afterwards and say something.
Yeah, people do. And it's great, because I wrote this piece because I wanted to talk. I've said in interviews before, and I'll say it again because I really stand by this, I feel that we're in a time where we can talk about mental health now, and that's brilliant, but we're talking about talking, we're not actually doing anything about it. We're in a time where we say it's okay to talk, but this all seems to be past tense. It's fine to stand up and say, I was ill and now I'm not, but it's not yet. The stigma is still there to stand up and say, I'm in the throes of something really serious, can someone help me? And that feels like that's the next thing to chip away at for me. And so this play has been very much, people have talked and people have cried and people have laughed, and that's so joyous to me. And also, the first few performances really felt like, okay, I've just got to, technically hit all my marks. Do I know what I'm doing? Can I do this? Like running a marathon, I suppose, and if you've never done it before. But now I know what I'm, I know what I'm doing. So I feel that the audience are the other character in this piece, I feel. And it's so lovely because I feel like I'm having a dialogue with them, and I get to feel them out and see how they're doing, and I know what they need, and feeling that energy being different every night. It's really exciting. Like, when you walk on and when I turn around and take everyone in at the beginning, it's such an exciting thing because you don't know. People might have read reviews, people might not have read reviews, they might have wandered in, they might know nothing about it, or they might know everything about it and be keen to see it. So you're just navigating a combination of expectations and anticipation, and then making sure... I, the playwright and actor, care about the audience very much, but the crucial difference is that Alice doesn't, and Alice can't, because she can't, doesn't have those feelings of care for herself and isn't able to have them for anyone else. So, sometimes as me, I do want to take my foot off the pedal when I can see people are really, really experiencing something, but then I also have a duty to the show. It doesn't work unless I drive it right through to the end.
It's interesting that you're so conscious of your audience. I would guess there are quite a lot of actors who just kind of mentally look at their feet and try and pretend there's no one out there and just do their job.
Well, that's sort of true of nearly every play I've done. It's just because I'm talking to you. I can't ignore you, because who am I talking to otherwise?
You could focus on a single person and ignore everybody else conceivably.
It's interesting. That often doesn't work, because then you will start to, when I've been in the audience when that's happened, you start to feel shortchanged pretty quickly.
Depends whether you're the one or the other 59.
Yes, I think I would be a bit miffed if I was one of the 59.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, when you're acting for television, that's a note you're often given, that the camera is one person, not an audience, that you are that person is a single person that's standing there, whereas an audience is a living, breathing body of people. And it's so important to make sure you take people in. We did one preview where I realised afterwards that I'd only spoken to people I could see, and that meant that there was an entire body at the back that weren't spoken to, and that sort of, I really learnt from that. And if you don't take everyone in, then we're not all on this journey together. So it's something that's really, really important to me.
What about the Edinburgh experience? You said you've done it a few times before.
Yes.
Presumably on the basis you keep coming back, you actually enjoy it, or...?
I do, I love it. There's nothing quite like it. We all complain about it when we're here, but I love it very, very much. And there's a sort of spirit and mentality here that is just so unique. And the companies that you see emerging and the professional relationships that get made, and it really feels... without it sounding like a big old love-in, it is something really special, and the support between artists and support of the work and the variety of work. It's stuff that I might never have gone to see in London or in regionals elsewhere. And so it's a really exciting thing to be a part of, and long may it continue. I hope to keep coming for a long time.
And what about the interaction between writing and acting? Do you kind of see yourself doing the two forever, or is one beginning to take over? Do you expect one to take over?
I hope to be doing them both forever. I love both of them very much, and they serve very different things for me. I'd started writing while I was in my last year of drama school, and it had never occurred to me to be a writer, or I didn't know if I was any good or not. I just was so dissatisfied with the parts out there for women, and also... the excellent parts were getting snapped up by, celebrities, for want of a better word. And I felt that there was a real sort of disjoint between what was available and there was an echelon that, you know, you weren't allowed to access almost. That's how it can feel at drama school. You can feel that it's all happening around you, and you're suddenly very aware that if your face and body aren't the right fit for someone, your ability is sort of meaningless. And that feels very cruel, and you know, like much of life, very unfair. And I thought, I really don't want that to be me. I just don't want that. I want to keep working. So I started writing, and I wrote a play called A First World Problem that went on at Theatre 503 for 2 weeks. And I wrote it, but I just sort of wrote it out of sheer panic. And it was something that was bothering me. It was something I'd had brewing in my head, but it had never occurred to me to write. It was just an opinion I had. And then I sent the script off, and 503 made me an offer, and I was really shocked. Like, I never even thought that I wasn't expecting a rejection email back even. I just thought that would be that.
And that was the first thing you'd ever written?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that went on in 2014. And then my acting agent, because I'd signed by that time and I'd showed her the script, I remember sort of pitching myself to her saying, well, I've actually got work lined up for myself, you know, if you'd like to take commission on that, like, please. And it's going on at 503. And I gave her the script, and she rang me and was like, it's really good. And I went, oh, okay, great. I'm glad you think it's good. And she goes, would you mind if I sent this to the literary department? And I went, no, not at all. And then a week later I had a writing agent, and I was so overwhelmed. And then everyone sort of said, what's next for you? And I was like, what do you mean? I don't know. I've just turned up. I've no idea what's next. Then I thought, I can do this for other people. Like, on a practical level, I thought I can do this for my friends who I know are brilliant, who aren't working. And also then I can change what's happening with parts for women. I can change that, help to change it. I feel like the tide is really shifting at the moment with the roles that are out there and the people writing those roles, and it's not quite there. I mean, God, it won't be there for decades at this rate, but I feel that we're starting to be taken seriously. It's
amazing it's taken, say 40 or 50 years of feminism to get to the stage where you're at the entrance, you're at the door.
Yeah, and I mean, I've said this before, the only way I could have made any work at all is because I rocked up late to a hugely important gender equality party that had happened without me. The only way I'm able to reap the benefits of any of this is because of the hard work and determination and sheer grit that people have put in years gone by. And then I hope to then do that for generations to come. Do you know what I mean? I think that's really, really important, that we keep moving forward and we keep pushing it forward.
How did you go into the business? Did you, as a sort of 7-year-old, do you think, I'm going to be an actor whatever happens, or did it come later?
I was one of the most precocious children you can imagine. I was just desperate to be an actor. I'd wanted to be an actor my whole life. And
to run in the family or anything?
No, just me. Yeah, there's no one else. And they're all sort of very bemused by it. They all work in sort of corporate capacities, and they dutifully come and they sit there and they're like, yeah, that's great. I mean, we don't get it, but
are they saying when you're going to give up and get a proper job?
No, that's very much a conversation that was had. And then I think it's funny, different things have different weight to different people. So I had like 3 lines in Downton Abbey, and then my mum can die happy now. Like, that's what she cares about. And so she is utterly thrilled, and that's her favourite thing that I've ever done or I'll ever do. An unnamed character walking into a room, saying one line and leaving. But as far as she's concerned, I made it then. That was the day. Whereas, other people, you tell someone you've written a play and they're like, oh, okay, whatever. And then you hand it to them in a published form, and suddenly they look at you like, oh my God, you're published. But it doesn't undo the work I did. I still wrote, it's really funny. And then you think that play text means more to some people than the actual performance, which is so bizarre to me. Yeah. But yeah, so it's funny. Like, I feel there's a lot of checkered, it depends. It depends what you're clinging to and what I suppose what success means to you. I mean, I've always been very content in that I'm just grateful to work, because I'm so aware of how of just how tough it is. And people, I suppose, might look at my CV now and think, oh my God, wow. But on my CV, you can't see the 3 months that I sat and hit refresh on my emails. That's not on my CV. But it's very much a part of it. And without that, those 3 months, that work doesn't accumulate. And there's a real... because when I was younger, I used to read interviews and things and hear podcasts and listen to people talking about their journey to this and this, and I found it very alienating because I thought, well, that won't be me. I might not be as successful as that. And so I
tend not to get the podcast with the people who haven't worked for 2 years, unfortunately. Maybe we'll want to do it.
I mean, it's interesting. Because there have been those gaps. I mean, I know Andrew Scott's spoken about this. He's like, I didn't work for ages, and I'd already done successful things that put me in the spotlight, and then there's a gap, and that, that gap is huge, and it feels, because you can't see the end of the gap. You can look back on it, but it's so I think it's really important to me, I suppose. But it's also exciting. It's what makes the work as urgent as it does, because you think, I've got this chance, brilliant, I've got it in front of me, let's go. Let's make something.
And having done Downton Abbey, you're still perfectly happy to come up to Edinburgh and sit in a rather damp, probably, or stand in a damp theatre every day for 3.5, 4 weeks, torturing yourself in front of a group of very devoted and enthusiastic people.
Well, bring it on. But also... I'm definitely not torturing myself. I'm having fun.
Good, I'm pleased.
I mean, but I wouldn't change it for the world. I just really love acting, and I know it's a cliche. God, I mean, I'm trying to think of something better to say than that, but I do. That would be a lie. I really love it.
And does it matter the medium? So you love it if you're doing TV or film or stage?
I'm having the best time. Like, I'm waiting for someone to tell me your time's up now. Like, I'm having such a great time, and it doesn't matter to me. Like, I'm in a Quacks, which is it's a new Victorian drama on, it's comedy drama set in Victorian times that's on BBC Two at the moment, and it aired last night. So I spoke to someone the other day who said, oh my God, you're everywhere. You think I filmed that in November last year, and then there was a huge old gap. But that's the biggest TV I've ever done. I play Florence Nightingale, and it's great fun, and the cast is amazing. I just sort of turned up and I thought, I'm hit with all my heroes. It's like Rupert Everett, Rory Kinnear, Andrew Scott. It's insane. But then as you say, I'm back in that damp room wearing my costume barefoot. But I'm having fun. I think the minute I stop having fun would be the time to bow out, because I think it's such a precarious job, and no one's getting paid enough not to have fun. I mean, we do this because we love it. Otherwise, I'd
go into the corporate job.
Otherwise, I'd have listened to my parents, and I'd be a millionaire by now. I mean, one hopes. I wouldn't.
Probably would.
I probably wouldn't. I mean, let's be honest. But I think so. It is important, and it should be a joyous thing.
And what about the future? Do you see yourself, well, presume you do, balancing the acting on stage, on screen, the writing?
Absolutely. I mean, I've got very good at writing around acting now, because when acting jobs come, you snap them up, because that's the nature of the job. But I am now, I can write in my trailer now. I've got that down to a fine art. So I can work around those hours. So often that's the way, because it's like buses, they all come at once. So sometimes you're navigating 3 things at once, and then you've got nothing for a bit, and then lots of things again. And so it's great fun, actually. I get a real kick out of that. I like to keep busy. And again, this was all born from me not wanting to do nothing. I have to keep busy, and if I'm doing nothing, an idea will muscle its way to the fore, and I think, I've got to write that.
Wonderful. Millie Thomas, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.